Tonight on Primetime Politics, deal interrupted.
We had made more progress, in my opinion, in those weeks than we had in a very long time.
Canada's ambassador said trade talks with the United States were going well until that anti-tariff ad triggered the U.S. president. Coming up, our political strategists will give their assessment on that ad campaign and whether the Prime Minister bears any responsibility for failing to stop it from airing. Also,
Trump is letting his delicate little ego drive U.S. trade.
The U.S. Senate votes against Trump's Canadian tariffs. We'll go to Washington to find out where that effort goes from here. And 30 years since the 1995 referendum. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. The Prime Minister continues his trip to Asia this evening, earlier today meeting South Korean officials as Mark Carney toured the Hanwha shipyard. Canada is looking to buy new submarines, but is also looking for new trading partners to diversify Canada's economy. There is greater urgency around that latter goal because trade talks with the United States are currently in limbo after Donald Trump pulled the plug in reaction to that anti-tariff ad sponsored by the Ontario government. Still, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in South Korea this week did create some time for the two leaders to meet, which got a positive, if not brief, review from the U.S. president.
Anything on Canada?
We had a very nice conversation with him last night. We really did.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, we're getting a better understanding of how well talks were going before Trump terminated negotiations last week. Take a listen to what Canada's ambassador to the United States, Kirsten Hillman, told a Senate committee about the progress that was being made.
We did make some important steps forward. We did. We were trying to work out sort of the contours of what a first step in an agreement between Canada and the United States could look like. We were exchanging views on that, and we were putting those views on paper. We still had gaps in our different perceptions of what would make a good deal. We weren't there yet, but we were working on narrowing those, and we had succeeded in narrowing. We had certainly succeeded in narrowing some of them. There's still work to do. I want to suggest that we're on the verge of an arrangement, but we had made more progress, in my opinion, in those weeks than we had in a very long time.
Well, to talk about trade, the strategic choices made around that, and the upcoming budget, we're now joined by Liberal strategist Susan Smith, principal and co-founder of Blue Sky Strategy Group, and Conservative strategist Cole Hogan. Hello to both of you.
Hello.
Okay, so here you have Kirsten Hillman being grilled about trade talks in Washington. We know those talks were suspended by Donald Trump because of that ad from Ontario, that anti-tariff ad. Let's begin there, because the three of us have not actually talked about it as a group quite yet. Was that ad a strategic error, Susan?
Perhaps in hindsight. It depends who you talk to. There's one story I hear that Doug Ford felt that the way the talks were going weren't going to be beneficial for the auto sector, so he needed and wanted to make a point. It's a bit of wag the dog, you know, look over here, I'm doing something. But perhaps people didn't think through how that might land with the notoriously thin-skinned and mercurial Donald Trump. So I don't think it was a government of Canada strategic error, but I think perhaps the fallout was not as anticipated by Premier Trump, or maybe it was, or Premier Ford, or perhaps it was because maybe he didn't like the way things were going.
Okay, I'm going to pick up on that point in a second,
Sure.
but quickly, do you think it was a strategic error, Cole?
No, and I think like we've seen some interesting pieces leading up to this. So we saw Doug Ford say that Mark Carney and his chief of staff saw the ad, and then Mark Carney's office in the PMO put out a comment that said we were not involved in the production and distribution of the ad, which of course they weren't. It was a Government of Ontario ad, but it did admit the fact of that they likely did see these ads, the Prime Minister and the chief of staff. Then after that, we saw Mark Carney say that negotiations relations with the U.S. were going well up until this ad hit the airwaves. Ambassador Hillman backed him up on that and said they were, shaping the contours of an agreement. Then the White House said, the negotiations were starting to sour before that. So there's a lot of back and forth here, and it's hard to know who to believe at times in this purposely broken game of telephone. But whatever the approach is for our interactions and negotiations with the states going forward, it can't be this. There can only be one team at the negotiating table, and that's the Prime Minister's jurisdiction and his cabinet. But I think you can see why provinces like Ontario and BC, with their large economies that are very impacted by this trade war, why they want to get their message out there with their ad campaigns.
Yeah, and underline the fact that the side deals that they were talking about progress being made on were steel, aluminum, energy, not to do with softwood lumber, not to do with the auto industry, as you said. But, picking up now on Cole's point and what you said earlier, you make the distinction that this was Ontario, not a federal. But, based on what we heard from Doug Ford, the Prime Minister did see this ad and did not stop it. So does that create a problem for Mark Carney?
In what world would the Prime Minister of Canada, would any Premier listen to the Prime Minister saying, don't run an ad that you're going to? Would Danielle Smith, would Scott Moe, hopefully David Eby will think twice all by himself. So I don't know what happened in the conversation with the Prime Minister and the Premier on that ad. I think Doug Ford did exactly what Doug Ford wanted to do, and that's what premiers do.
Cole?
Yeah, I think we take Doug Ford at his word that, the Prime Minister and his Chief of Staff definitely saw the ad. I think it was just uncertain what the exact impact would be. And now that we're seeing the aftermath of this, maybe David Eby will reconsider his decision to run an ad from BC down south.
Okay, I do wonder about that, though, because, all indications are from Premier Eby is that he's still going to go forward with his own anti-tariff
Eby's in trouble in BC. So this is a bit of wag the dog, as I said, right? Eby needs to show he's doing something. He's in huge trouble electorally. The economy in BC is in really big trouble. The forestry thing is an additional whack on something that was already floundering. So he may make a localized, personal calculation that he needs to do something to show British Columbians that he's standing up for them. Might be the wrong thing for the country, probably the wrong thing for BC to do, given how President Trump is responding to things. I hope he doesn't go that far, but it could happen.
Is it wrong, though? Because, the Prime Minister has been criticized for not following through enough on his elbows up rhetoric that he came over. Okay, let me finish my question first. The rhetoric that he had during the election campaign. But here you have an ad now that sends a message of elbows up, not from the Premier, not from the Prime Minister, but from Canada. Is there a benefit to have almost like a good cop, bad cop on this messaging, so that on the one hand, here's Mark Carney doing the charm offensive with Donald Trump, and the premiers are able to be the conciliaries that he cannot be in this moment in time?
There are times that I think the good cop, bad cop mechanism has been very helpful, and it doesn't mean it won't be helpful in the future. I think it probably, given where discussions were at this moment, maybe it wasn't helpful, but who knows with Trump? Like, really, the guy had essentially a hissy fit, got a hold of his phone and called off the trade negotiations. There's no playbook for that. You have to be able as a country to adjust. I don't know that anybody anticipated the level of the fury of Donald Trump, but I'm told, the ambassador was talking to some folks this week and he was not dropping F-bombs at Premier Ford's envoy. But basically, it was the petulance of the president that paused things.
Cole?
Yeah, I think we'll have to see a bit of a different approach. I wonder when the next First Minister's meeting is and how that will untangle. I imagine that the discourse will be a little different than the first one was. But I think to Susan's point, David Eby will continue. Whenever he gets a national stage, he will take it. So, him versus Danielle Smith on, a Western directed pipeline project, he's going to take that opportunity to take a local stand in BC. And he'll do that in regards to trade in these ads as well. So the next time the First Minister's meeting rolls around, I think we'll see a different relationship between the premiers and the feds, and it won't be as kumbaya this time.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, of course, we'll keep following this. I want to talk about another topic because, of course, next week is the budget. We heard Andrew Scheer yesterday accuse the Liberals of essentially fashioning a budget that the opposition cannot support. He's accusing the Liberals wanting an election in this moment in time. And add to that, take a look at this Substack. This is from Conservative strategist Fred Delory, who says the Parliament is 5 5 months old and already circling the drain. The Liberals will table their budget on November the 4th, and it's going to fail, not because of scandal or surprise, but because the math, the momentum, and the mood have all turned. Now, I'll get to whether or not you think this budget will actually pass in a moment, but what is the strategic advantage for the various parties to pull the plug on this parliament right now?
None. None. Nobody wants an election. Canadians would be furious if there was an election. If we're making any progress at all with the U.S., this would pause it desperately, and you would, the economy would be reeling, I think, even further without some firm direction and leadership there. I don't know where Pierre Poilievre would run. They don't want him back in Ottawa-Carleton. Or Nepean-Carleton. I don't know where he would go. The NDP have no leader and no money. The Bloc Québécois, maybe they think they have something to gain from there. And the Liberals, I think, are in a good position where they can continue to follow through in the mandate that Canadians give them. Not a single, well, there may be a few Canadians that want an election, but as a whole, as a country, that's a wrong move, and I don't think any party really stands to gain from it.
Cole, do you think any party has any tactical advantage to call an election right now?
Sure. Let's go party by party here, because there's a few things that I'm really watching. In particular, I want to know how Chrystia Freeland votes on this budget, given the fact that she couldn't tolerate Trudeau spending. Will she be able to tolerate Carney spending, or will there be another political salvo on the way out the door? I kind of doubt it, but I'm curious to see how she votes. The Bloc, I think they've made a lot of noise previously when Trudeau was Prime Minister about increased OAS payments, and we've seen those moves from Blanchette and the Bloc Québécois before. I think that they can easily oppose this budget and, say that they're standing up for Quebecers and bolster the Parti Québécois' chances in the next provincial election in 2026. The NDP, I think they need to make more noise than they have been so far. Don Davies and the NDP are wearing the legacy of Jagmeet Singh, where I think a lot of Canadians view the NDP as the junior party to the Liberal Party because of the amount of times that Trudeau supported or was supported by Jagmeet Singh. So here's the thing, too, with the NDP. Don Davies does not have an NDP caucus vote to whip, so he can't tell them which way to vote. And I guarantee that if you are not running for the federal NDP leadership and you're a sitting NDP MP, you might just be voting quietly on your phone.
Okay, so
3 votes is the difference between the Liberals passing this budget and not. Somebody could be out of the country. Someone could have to go to a funeral. Someone might have a stomachache that day and be unable to get to their phone. That Elizabeth May, don't forget Elizabeth May. If Elizabeth May supports the government, you're down to 2 votes. So there is a scenario where people can abstain, be absent, or they secure enough votes for the budget to pass. But I believe this budget will pass.
So when Andrew Scheer says that the Liberals are crafting a budget that the opposition cannot support, what do you take from that?
What else would you expect Andrew Scheer to say? I mean, the guy will say anything. He was out defending Pierre Poilievre in the RCMP comments last week. So Mr. Scheer has his talking points for the day. He's found whatever angle he thinks will make a point. The Conservatives have spent the fall accusing Mark Carney of stealing their ideas, and all of a sudden things are going to be crystallized in a budget, and they can't support that. I think Mr. Scheer talks out of both sides of his mouth.
Sure. So I don't think the Conservatives can support this budget in terms of the deficit and the massive spending. I really just don't see the Conservatives voting for it. The Bloc, I don't see them voting for it either. Elizabeth May, to Susan's point, she could easily support this budget, no problem. I think some of the more quiet NDP MPs will be the ones who support the Liberals and prop them up once again.
So that's what we're looking for then, the NDP and where that goes.
Say so, yeah.
Or a head count, right? You need a head count too. Right. They could go on division, or there's just not enough. There are three MPs in the opposition who aren't present to vote that day. Right. That's the other thing that can happen too. Okay. And you hope they don't get it wrong like John Crosby did. But I don't think the government's going to fall on the budget.
Okay. Well, we are watching. The budget, of course, is next Tuesday, and then we're going to have a postmortem of it on the Wednesday. But for today, Susan, Cole, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, today also marks the 30th anniversary of the 1995 Quebec referendum, a vote that had Quebecers and Canadians outside the province debating Quebec's place within Confederation. Had the yes side won, sovereigntists said they would present the Government of Canada a new partnership agreement. And under that scenario, had Canada refused to negotiate or refuse Quebec's proposal, then Premier Jacques Parisella said his government would invoke a unilateral declaration of independence. And here's the question Quebecers were asked to vote yes or no on. Do you agree that Quebec should become sovereign after having made a formal offer to Canada for a new economic and political partnership within the scope of the bill respecting the future of Quebec and the agreement signed on June 12, 1995? And as you can see, Federalists, or the no side, won the day, but just barely. Well, in 1995, John Parisella was strategic advisor for the no side. He joins us right now in Montreal. John, thank you for being here. Always good to see you.
Good to see you, Michael.
Listen, it's hard to believe it's been 30 years since that night, since that vote. And I do wonder about that evening and what you were doing and what you were feeling, because here you have the results coming in. At the end of the evening, a narrow victory for Federalist forces, but so close Canada looked like it was going to dissolve. What was it like to be in that evening looking at the numbers come in?
Well, I was I was part of a panel that night doing an assessment of the results as they were coming in. So I was on television that night, and it's clear that we were nervous, but I felt confident that we would win. Why? Because I had followed the campaign from day one, and I've been very much involved. And I checked with our pollsters, our key pollster, before I went to the television station, and he said to me, he says, it'll be a 51-49 result. Well, I said, that's not very reassuring. So I called Robert Bourassa, my former boss. I was chief of staff to Robert Bourassa, and I said, look, what's your call? Well, he says, I think it's going to be 53-47 because I think we'll pull that out. Well, that reassured me because Parisella and I go back a long time, and so I felt reassured. So I was not, I really wasn't nervous that night, and I don't want to give the impression that I was above the storm, but I mean, I was concerned, obviously, throughout the campaign, because we started the campaign where we were ahead in the polls, but then when Lucien Bouchard was named the negotiator en chef, the lead negotiator, should the yes side, should the separatist side win the yes side, the poll numbers started to increase for the yes side. And had the referendum taken place probably a week earlier, probably the yes would have pulled it out 51-49. But we did finally a week later, and 94% of the people voted, which is an incredible amount. And it said a lot about the civility that this campaign was. We were able to solve the problem of staying of Canada and Quebec through the ballot, not the bullet. And I remain very proud of that. 30 years later, I prefer thinking back that we had a very polarized situation that other countries in the world solved through violence and through revolution. We were able to do it through democracy, through the ballot. So I'm proud of that. But
which is good. Which is good to remember, the fact that we were able to democratically as a country to solve such a contentious issue. But, you know, I think back to 95, and I think about the campaign leading up to referendum night itself, and that big Federalist rally, the unity rally that took place in Place du Canada in Montreal, that huge sign making its way through the crowds that said, Mon Canada comprend le Québec. It makes me wonder, what were the lessons learned out of that? Do you think enough lessons were learned out of the 95 referendum, considering how close we were to breaking up as a country?
Well, I think the lessons that we could take from all of this, of course, is to continue dialoguing, to try to find ways to accommodate certain requests. Obviously, Quebec is more autonomous in its way of seeing things, but Quebec was there when Federation was created. We were one of the 4 provinces. We have a federal system largely because Quebec, wanted that. So the important thing is that we need to continue dialoguing. And the question, of course, that was asked by the yes side was extremely vague. I mean, it was not just a mandate. It was not the mandate to break up or to separate. It was a mandate to offer an new economic and political partnership, and if it didn't work out, then we would become a separate country. So that vagueness, in my view, probably gave them certain momentum at a certain point, but fundamentally the question was, do you want to stay or do you want to leave Canada? And Quebecers, for a second time in 15 years, because in 1980 it was 60-40, and 1995 it was 51-49. But we've got to remember that we had the patriation of the Constitution against the will of Quebec, the Quebec National Assembly. We had the fall of Leech Lake, which had the consensus for a number of years, and it fell at the last moment, the last day that it would have been adopted. And the Charlottetown Accord really didn't give the impression to Quebecers that they were being listened to. So these sort of factors made it a very close race. But I think we learned from this, and it's been 30 years, and we're able to talk about it in a very sane way. And as I keep telling everybody that I speak to in the last few days, it shows a lot about the quality of our democracy and the stability in the exercise of it.
Listen, John, I need a quick answer on this, quickly running out of time, but I do want to ask you, because Quebec will have a provincial election next year. The Parti Québécois leader, Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon, is promising to hold another referendum by 2030. Does that possibility worry you? Should it worry Federalists and Canadians outside of Quebec?
Well, Canada, we should always worry about the possibility that something could happen that would break up our country. But I think the circumstances it's too early to make any predictions right now. And it's even now the majority of Quebecers don't want a referendum on sovereignty, and the majority of Quebecers are still in favor of staying within Canada. So we're still a long way from dealing with that issue.
Okay. John, as I say, always appreciate the time. Thank you for this.
Thank you very much, Michael.
To Washington now, where U.S. senators passed a resolution last night terminating the national emergency declared to impose duties on articles imported from Canada. Now, the resolution did receive bipartisan support, with 4 Republican senators voting for the bill alongside Democrats. And in a moment, we're going to get into why Canadians may not want to get too excited by the result. But first, take a listen to 2 of the comments we heard during last night's debate.
Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution gives Congress, not the President, the power to impose tariffs and regulate commerce with foreign nations.
While he capitulates to Beijing, he's raising tariffs on Canada. How nonsensical, how stupid, how thoughtless.
On this vote, the yeas are 50, the nays are 46. The joint resolution is passed.
With more now on that vote in the U.S. Senate is Laura Kelly, foreign policy reporter for The Hill in Washington. Laura, good to see you again. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So this vote, that would theoretically have an effect on of preventing Donald Trump from putting tariffs on Canada, was only made possible because 4 Republicans sided with this Democratic resolution. What does that say to you about the concern within Republican ranks about these tariffs?
Unfortunately, not much. I think for these 4 Republicans that decided to join the resolution, it's politically safe for them. Senator Collins is the senator from Maine, so of course she has an interest in demonstrating to her constituency that she is against raising prices for them and creating hardship with President Trump's tariffs on Canada. Senator Rand Paul, this is a position that he's principled on. Senator Murkowski from Alaska, she also has a state bordering Canada, so it's important to have good relations. And then there is Senator Mitch McConnell, who really has very little to lose in opposing Trump and has really put himself at the forefront of opposing Trump when he does not agree with those policies. So in one respect, it's like, wow, 4 Republicans, they're breaking ranks, they're taking a position, but when you see what the downstream effects are, it's very little, and they're pretty safe.
Pretty safe, as you say, but is there concern within Republican ranks about these tariffs? Because at the end of the day, they do raise prices for the average American.
I think we saw the most concern and the most pushback from Republicans when President Trump said that he was going to, so kind of opposite to the tariffs, but when he was going to import beef from Argentina. So not exactly on tariffs, but on the president's policies. And if they're coming out against this one, it maybe signals that they're kind of reaching a breaking point where they can't just go along completely. So I found that interesting.
Mm-hmm. And what about Americans? How are they feeling about these tariffs? And I appreciate that, you know, it's going to be anecdotal, but pulling out of the Capitol building where you are right now, do Americans see the impact of tariffs? Because clearly Canadians are well versed in its impact on our economy.
I think the data is showing that while inflation is only slightly rising, there are concerns about prices on household goods and things like that. But the Chicago Council on Global Affairs have new survey results out this week where 3 in 4 Americans, I mean, the survey is specifically about the USMCA agreement, so I thought that was interesting. 3 in 4 Americans say the USMCA free trade agreement is good for the U.S. economy. That's 75%. And the majority of Americans see trade with Canada and Mexico as benefiting U.S. national security. For Americans who like trade with Canada, it's 81%. But there is a partisan divide where Republicans are more favorable toward tariffs compared to Democrats in this Chicago Council on Global Affairs survey. An April poll found that a majority of Americans are opposed to tariffs on Canada and Mexico in particular. So I think there is overall concern and stress among Americans about whether tariffs are the right policy, but this very deep division in American society between Republicans and Democrats will give, especially with Republicans supporting President Trump, will give the president and his supporters leeway to move forward on these things.
Mm-hmm. Leeway, as you say, and even with this vote from the U.S. Senate, it has gone in favor, from Canada's perspective, because it's against the tariffs on this country, but this vote has been described as largely symbolic. Why would it be only symbolic if it's the Senate that's passing it?
Yes, well, the resolution would have to go to the House for a vote. It's unlikely that House Speaker Mike Johnson is going to bring it up for a floor vote. And actually, the House isn't even here. The government has been shut down for, I think, nearly a month. I think we're coming up to it. And there's very little indication that there's movement towards opening the government. So we don't even have the House here to vote on anything. And then even if the House voted on it and passed it, President Trump could veto it when it comes to his desk.
Okay. Well, Laura, thank you for walking us through that. Appreciate the time this evening.
Thank you guys so much.
Well, one more note before we leave you this evening, because we do want to acknowledge Canada's Chief of Defence Staff, who today issued an apology on behalf of Canadian forces to members and their families who have experienced racism through their military careers. Take a listen now to General Jenny Carignan.
On behalf of the Canadian Armed Forces, I offer my most sincere and deepest apologies. I apologize to every CAF member, veteran who experienced racism, discrimination, and harassment. And I acknowledge we failed you.
The Canadian Armed Forces says the apology is not the end of a process, but rather a sign of its engagement to do better and foster a healthier workplace. Well, that is our program for you on this Thursday. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow. Until then, have a great evening.